What theory about the human mind keeps you up at night? Story 1 there is a theory of consciousness developed and formalized in the 2020s that begins with a simple question. What if your conscious experience isn't doing anything? Passive frame theory, developed by cognitive scientist Ezekiel Morcella, proposes that consciousness has zero causal power. It does not generate thoughts. It does not make decisions. It does not control behavior. What consciousness does, its entire function, is to serve as a passive display, a screen on which the outputs of unconscious neural processes are presented to a system that then acts on them, while the screen itself does nothing but show. The analogy that captures it: imagine a cinema screen believing it is directing the film. The images appear on it. It does not produce them. It did not write the script. It has no influence on what gets projected. And yet, if you asked the screen, it would report that it experiences each scene vividly and feels responsible for the story. Under passive frame theory, this is your situation. The decisions have already been made by processes that don't involve your conscious experience at all. The thoughts have already been generated. The actions have already been initiated. What you experience as deciding, thinking, and choosing is the presentation of these already completed processes to a passive observer, which is you, which is consciousness, which is doing nothing but watching. The framework is supported by a body of neuroscientific evidence, including Libet's readiness potential findings, which showed neural signatures of motor decisions appearing before conscious awareness of them, and a range of unconscious priming research showing that behavior is influenced by stimuli the conscious system never registers. What makes passive frame theory specifically uncomfortable is not that it questions free will. It's that it questions whether your consciousness has ever actually done anything at all. Every choice you felt you were making, every thought you felt you were having, you were watching a film you didn't make and couldn't change. Story 2: most theories of consciousness take the problem seriously in a specific way. There is something it feels like to see red, to taste coffee, to feel pain. The raw qualitative character of experience, which philosophers call qualia. And the challenge is to explain how physical brain processes produce these felt qualities. The hard problem of consciousness. Keith Frankish's illusionism takes a different position. The hard problem doesn't need to be solved because its premise is false. There is no phenomenal consciousness in the relevant sense. There is no what it's like layer of experience beyond the functional and representational properties of mental states. What exists is your brain representing states as if they have felt qualities, and this representation is the entire story. The felt quality itself is the representation, not something the representation is about. The position sounds like it's denying that you're conscious. Frankish is careful to distinguish. He's not denying that you have experiences. He's denying that those experiences have the special, phenomenal character we typically ascribe to them. The irreducible, intrinsic, subjective quality that seems to resist physical explanation. What's left when you remove that layer? Functional states that influence behavior, that produce representations of having felt qualities, that feel from the inside as if they have rich phenomenal character, because that's what the representation is of. The representation isn't wrong in the way a false belief is wrong. It's more like a cognitive illusion. The system reliably produces the sense that experiences have a phenomenal layer, without that layer actually existing. The specific vertigo of illusionism: if it's true, you can't tell it's true from inside. The sense that your experience has phenomenal richness is exactly what the theory predicts you'd have. The theory is consistent with everything you experience, and that's either a feature or the most philosophically disturbing thing anyone has ever proposed. Story 3: integrated information theory. It is one of the most mathematically developed and empirically engaged theories of consciousness in contemporary neuroscience. Developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, it proposes that consciousness is identical to integrated information. A system is conscious to the degree that it generates information as a whole that cannot be reduced to the information generated by its parts. The measure of this integration is called phi. The theory accounts for a number of features of consciousness and makes specific, testable predictions about which brain regions contribute to conscious experience. It has serious scientific credentials and serious scientific proponents. It also has an implication that many find it difficult to accept. Under it, any system with non-zero phi has some degree of consciousness. The question is not whether a system is or isn't conscious, but how much consciousness it has. And phi is non-zero for a great many systems that we would ordinarily be confident are not conscious. A thermostat integrates information across its components. A photodiode does. Simple logic gates do. The implication of it taken at face value is that these systems have some tiny, vanishingly small but non-zero amount of genuine subjective experience, that there is something it is like, however minimal, to be a thermostat registering temperature. This position is called panpsychism, the view that consciousness is a fundamental and widespread feature of the physical world. It sounds like mysticism. It follows from the mathematical structure of one of mainstream neuroscience's best developed theories. Tononi himself accepts the panpsychist implication. Many of his critics use it as a reductio ad absurdum of the theory. Whether the thermostat has feelings is not a rhetorical question under it. It's a mathematical one. And the mathematics says, yes, a little. Story 4 panpsychism comes in different forms. The version that most people encounter first is the bottom-up variety. Tiny particles or fundamental physical entities have some minimal form of experience, and consciousness in complex beings like us emerges from the integration of these micro-experiential properties. This is sometimes called micropsychism and faces specific philosophical problems, most notably the combination problem. How do many tiny experiences combine to produce one unified experience like yours? Cosmopsychism inverts the architecture. Rather than building consciousness up from small pieces, it proposes that the fundamental unit of consciousness is the whole. The universe itself is a single, unified conscious entity and individual minds. Your mind, my mind, the minds of all experiencing beings are localized decompositions of that cosmic consciousness. On this view, you are not a small conscious thing in a large unconscious universe. You are a local pattern in which the universe's consciousness is concentrated and particularized. Your sense of being a separate, bounded subject is not false. It's a real feature of how the cosmic consciousness has decomposed in your region, but the separateness is not fundamental. At the deepest level, your mind and every other mind and the mind of the universe are one thing, experienced from different positions within itself. Cosmopsychism is associated primarily with philosophers Philip Goff and Ite Shani, and draws on Spinoza's monism and certain readings of Schopenhauer. It is not mainstream philosophy of mind, but is taken seriously enough to appear in major academic journals. The specific appeal: it resolves the combination problem by reversing it. Instead of asking how micro-experiences combine into unified consciousness, you ask how unified cosmic consciousness decomposes into individual ones. Whether the second question is easier than the first is contested. The implication is specific. You have never been alone in any meaningful sense. Story 5 Mysterianism is the philosophical position that the question of how physical processes in the brain produce subjective experience, the hard problem of consciousness, will never be solved. Not because the answer is mystical or beyond science in principle, but because human cognitive architecture is specifically the wrong kind of system for understanding this particular problem. Philosopher Colin McGinn, who developed the position most carefully, draws an analogy. A dog is cognitively incapable of understanding calculus. Not because calculus is supernatural, not because there are no facts about it, not because the right kind of system couldn't understand it, but because the dog's cognitive system is specifically structured in a way that makes this domain inaccessible. There is nothing wrong with the dog. Calculus is just outside what that kind of brain can do. McGinn argues that human brains are in this position with respect to consciousness. The facts about how physical processes produce subjective experience are perfectly natural facts, about the physical world. A sufficiently different cognitive system could, in principle, grasp them. But human cognitive architecture, shaped by evolution for tracking objects in the world, modeling other minds, solving social and practical problems, happens to be the wrong shape for grasping the relationship between brain activity and phenomenal experience. If McGinn is right, the hard problem will never be solved. Not because it has no solution, because we are structurally incapable of finding it. The answer exists. We cannot access it. We are the dog. The specific discomfort of Mysterianism is that it cannot be disproved from within human cognition. If our understanding of consciousness is limited in the way McGinn proposes, we cannot step outside that limitation to check. The theory is compatible with everything we can observe and everything we will ever be able to investigate. We might be looking at the wall of our cognitive cage and calling it the horizon. Story 6 predictive processing is a framework for understanding perception and cognition that has become increasingly central to neuroscience and philosophy of mind over the past 2 decades. The core claim is specific and strange. Perception is not a process of the brain receiving sensory input and constructing a picture of the world from the bottom up. It is a process of the brain generating predictions about what the world should look like and adjusting those predictions based on incoming sensory data. What you experience as perception, the vivid, present, immediate world around you, is your brain's model. The model is continuously updated by sensory input, but the model, not the input, is what you experience. Neuroscientist Anil Seth calls this the controlled hallucination. The difference between normal perception and hallucination is not that one is accurate and one is generated by the brain. Both are generated by the brain. The difference is how much external correction is being applied. In normal perception, the model is tightly constrained by sensory input and the prediction errors are small. In hallucination, the model has come loose from sensory input and is running more freely. In dreaming, the sensory input pathway is essentially closed, and the model runs entirely on its own. In psychedelic experience, the model's confidence in its own predictions is reduced, forcing more weight onto raw sensory input and producing unusual perceptual experiences. The implication: you have never seen the world directly. You have seen your brain's model of the world, updated in real time by sensory input, structured by your prior expectations, shaped by your history. What feels like perception, the direct, unmediated experience of a present reality, is a sophisticated internal prediction that the world keeps correcting. The corrections keep you functional. The model is what you live in. Story 7 in the early 1980s. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet designed an experiment that produced one of the most discussed and most disturbing findings in the scientific study of free will. Participants sat in front of a clock face and were instructed to flex their wrists whenever they felt like it. A spontaneous, unconstrained, voluntary movement. They were also instructed to note the position of the clock hand at the moment they first felt the conscious urge to move. Electrodes on the scalp measured EEG activity. Libet found that a specific electrical signature, the readiness potential, a gradually building electrical signal associated with voluntary movement, appeared in the brain data approximately 550 milliseconds before the actual movement. This in itself was expected and had been known since the 1960s. What was not expected, the moment participants reported becoming consciously aware of the urge to move, came approximately 200 milliseconds before the movement, about 350 milliseconds after the readiness potential had already begun. The neural preparation for the movement was underway for more than a third of a second before the person was aware of wanting to make it. The brain was getting ready before the conscious mind knew there was anything to get ready for. The decision, if it was a decision, was made below the level of conscious awareness and then presented to consciousness as a felt urge that appeared spontaneous. Libet himself thought this left room for a veto. Consciousness could still cancel the action in that 200 millisecond window. Subsequent research has found that veto decisions also show neural antecedents before conscious awareness. The readiness potential findings have been questioned on methodological grounds, and the interpretation remains actively contested. The discomfort hasn't been resolved. The question it raises, whether the felt sense of deciding is a cause of action or a report of something that has already happened, remains genuinely open. Story 8, the Interpreter Module. Your brain invents explanations for things it didn't do. Michael Gazzaniga's research with split brain patients, people who have had the corpus callosum severed to treat severe epilepsy, produced what is arguably the most specific and verifiable finding about the brain's tendency to confabulate. In the split brain condition, the left and right hemispheres operate without direct communication. Information presented to the left visual field goes to the right hemisphere. Information presented to the right visual field goes to the left hemisphere, which controls speech in most people. Gazzaniga and his colleagues exploited this separation. They showed a command, say walk, only to the right hemisphere. The patient would stand up and begin walking. Then, because the left hemisphere had not seen the command, they asked the patient, "Why are you walking?" The left hemisphere, which controls speech but hadn't received the instruction, had to explain behavior it hadn't caused. It always had an explanation. "I'm going to get a drink of water. I wanted to stretch my legs." The explanations were delivered with the confident, unhedged quality of ordinary self-report. The patients did not say, "I don't know." They did not experience uncertainty. The left hemisphere, which Gazzaniga named the interpreter, generated a plausible account for behavior it had not initiated and delivered it as if it were accurate memory. The implication Gazzaniga draws is wide. The interpreter is not a feature only of split-brain patients. It is a general feature of the left hemisphere's operation in everyone. The seamless narrative of reasons and motivations that you experience as explaining your behavior is, at least in part, being generated by a system that is confabulating explanations for decisions made elsewhere. The explanations feel like memory. They may be invention. Story 9, confabulation in amnesia. Some patients invent memories in real time and believe every word. Confabulation, the spontaneous production of fabricated, distorted, or misinterpreted memories without the conscious intention to deceive, is a documented neurological symptom associated with certain types of amnesia and brain damage, most commonly involving the frontal lobes or structures involved in memory consolidation. What makes confabulation clinically and philosophically striking is its character. Confabulating patients do not know they are confabulating. They are not lying. They are not guessing. They produce false accounts of their recent activities, their current circumstance, and their personal histories with the full subjective confidence of genuine memory. The accounts are delivered in the ordinary voice of someone recalling something that happened. A patient with severe anterograde amnesia, unable to form new memories, might be asked what they did this morning. They will describe, in detail, activities they did not do, a meeting they didn't attend, a meal they didn't eat, a phone call they didn't make. The description has the texture of memory. It was generated in real time by a brain that cannot access what actually happened and fills the gap with plausible construction. The clinical phenomenon raises a question about the autobiographical memory of neurologically intact people that researchers have pursued with uncomfortable results. How much of ordinary memory is similarly constructed rather than retrieved? Memory research has consistently shown that normal memory is reconstructive, that it is not a recording, but a recreation, influenced by subsequent information, expectations, and the current needs of the remembering system. Confabulation is the extreme version of a process that may be operating continuously in normal memory, below the threshold of obvious error. The certainty with which confabulating patients deliver false memories is the certainty you have about your own memories right now. Story 10, Dennett's multiple drafts. There is no moment when you actually experience anything. Daniel Dennett's multiple drafts model of consciousness, developed primarily in his 1991 book, Consciousness Explained, makes a specific and deeply counterintuitive claim. There is no single place in the brain where experience happens, no moment when the various processes contributing to your awareness converge into a final, definitive conscious experience. The ordinary model of consciousness that most people implicitly hold is something like a Cartesian theater, a central space in the brain where information is gathered and presented to an inner observer, a place where perception becomes experience, where the film gets screened. Dennett argues this model is entirely wrong, and not just wrong in detail, but wrong in its basic architecture. What actually happens, Dennett proposes, is that multiple parallel processing streams are continuously generating, revising, and competing to establish accounts of the world. These are the drafts, not a sequence of revisions to a single narrative, but simultaneous, competing processes without a master editor. What gets reported or influences behavior is whatever draft wins the competition at any given moment for any given question. There is no final, authoritative experience. There is no single moment when the experience becomes real. This has a specific implication. The question, when did you actually experience X, has no answer, not because the timing is hard to measure, but because there is no fact of the matter. The felt sense of a unified, continuous stream of experience is itself a retrospective construct, a story the system tells about itself. The discomfort Dennett's model produces in many readers is not that it denies consciousness, it's that it locates consciousness precisely in the distributed activity of competing processes, without any point at which something becomes the experience rather than a process contributing to one. The Cartesian theater is empty. The show is happening everywhere at once. Story 11, The Bundle Theory of Self. There is no you, just a fast-moving sequence of mental events. David Hume, in a treatise of human nature in 1739, looked inward to find himself, and reported a specific finding. I always stumble on some particular perception or other, of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never catch myself at any time without a perception, and can never observe anything but the perception. The eye that looks for itself finds only contents, thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions. It never finds the observer doing the looking. Hume concluded that the self is not a separate entity that has these experiences. It is the bundle of experiences itself. There is no unified, persistent subject beneath the flow of mental events. There are only the events. This is the bundle theory of personal identity, and it has a direct Buddhist parallel in the doctrine of anatta, no self, in which what we call a self is analyzed as a collection of impermanent, interacting processes with no fixed essence underlying them. The convergence of an 18th century Scottish empiricist and early Buddhist philosophy on the same conclusion by different routes is one of the stranger features of the problem. The specific implications of the bundle theory are hard to sit with. If there is no persistent self, who remembers yesterday? Who makes promises about tomorrow? Who is the person who woke up this morning in what you call your body? The bundle theory's answer: memory creates a narrative of continuity that feels like persistence. But what actually exists is a rapid succession of momentary mental events, each arising from preceding conditions and giving rise to succeeding ones, with no owner persisting through them. The sense that these are happening to you, to a unified subject, is itself one of the events in the bundle, not a fact about who is having them. Story 12, The Self-Model Theory. No one has ever had a self. They've had a representation of one. Thomas Metzinger is a philosopher who has spent decades working on the question of what the self is, and has arrived at a conclusion that he acknowledges is difficult to fully believe even while knowing the arguments for it. No one has ever had a self. Not you. Not anyone. Not ever. Metzinger's self-model theory of subjectivity proposes that what we call the self is a specific kind of representational model that the brain generates, the phenomenal self-model, or PSEM. The PSEM represents the organism as a unified, continuous, embodied subject located in a world. It is a model, not a thing. And crucially, it is transparent. You can't see it as a model. because you see through it. The representation appears to be the reality. When the SEM is disrupted, out-of-body experiences, depersonalization, certain drug states, some meditation experiences, the gap between the model and reality becomes visible. The sense of being a located, embodied, continuous self wavers. People describe floating above their bodies, feeling detached from their thoughts, sensing that the I is not quite where it usually seems to be. What these disruptions reveal, Metzinger argues, is what the normal state is hiding. The self you experience is always, in every moment, a construct. The sense of being the kind of thing that has a continuous existence, that owns its experiences, that is the center of a perspectival world. This is what the SEM generates, and it is not a report about an independently existing entity. It is the entity. Or rather, there is no entity. There is the model running. Metzinger's own reaction to this conclusion, as he describes it, philosophically convincing, experientially almost inaccessible. You can know it and still not feel it. Story 13, Blindsight. Patients who say they're blind can still see, they just don't know they can. Blindsight is one of the most philosophically productive neurological phenomena ever documented, because it drives a wedge between two things that ordinary experience treats as inseparable: visual information processing and visual awareness. Patients with blindsight have sustained damage to the primary visual cortex, the region of the brain where the main visual pathway terminates. They report subjective blindness in the corresponding region of their visual field. They sincerely, accurately report that they cannot see anything in that area. When asked about a stimulus placed in the blind region, they say they see nothing. And yet, when asked to guess where a stimulus is located in the blind region, when told to point to something they insist they cannot see, they point accurately at rates far above chance. When asked to guess whether a stimulus is present or absent, they guess correctly at rates far above chance. With moving stimuli, with gratings, with emotional faces, across a range of visual properties, the information is being processed and is influencing behavior in people who subjectively cannot see. The visual system is doing two things at once. The main pathway, through primary visual cortex, produces the visual experience of seeing, the felt quality of visual awareness. A secondary pathway, intact in blindsight patients, processes visual information and makes it available for behavior without producing any felt experience of seeing. What this means, seeing and being aware that you're seeing are not the same process. Information can be processed and used without ever entering conscious awareness. The patient who points accurately at the stimulus they say they cannot see is not lying. They cannot see it. Something in them can. The two processes normally happen together. In blindsight, you can watch them come apart. Story 14, Cotard's delusion, real. Documented patients are completely convinced they are dead. Cotard's delusion is a rare but well-documented psychiatric and neurological condition first described by French neurologist Jules Cotard in 1882 and documented in case reports ever since. Patients with the condition develop a sincere, stable conviction that they are dead, that they do not exist, that they are in the process of decomposing, or that specific organs have disappeared or ceased to function. The clinical descriptions have a specific quality that is different from how fictional portrayals of psychological disturbance usually look. The patients are often coherent, calm, and able to discuss their condition. They understand that the people around them think they are alive. They simply disagree. One frequently cited patient, described by neurologist V.S. Ramachandran, when asked how he could be dead if he was walking around and talking, replied with the simple logic of someone who has worked out the implications of their situation. Doctors don't always know as much as they think they do. The neurological basis involves disruptions in circuits connecting the visual and emotional processing systems, similar to the mechanism proposed for Capgras delusion, in which a person's own face, reflected in a mirror or felt through body sensation, fails to trigger the normal sense of familiarity and emotional resonance that grounds the ordinary sense of being oneself. The mismatch between the information and the expected emotional response is resolved by the delusional belief something is wrong with what's in the mirror, and what's wrong is that the thing there isn't alive. The body is present. The emotional sense of being in it is not. The brain resolves the discrepancy in the only way the remaining information supports. Whatever this is, it is not a living person. This is a documented condition. It has happened to real people. It is happening to someone right now. Story 15: Capgras Delusion. The person you love has been replaced by an identical imposter. Capgras delusion, first described by French psychiatrist Joseph Capgras in 1923, is a condition in which a patient becomes convinced that someone close to them, typically a family member or intimate partner, has been replaced by an imposter who is physically identical but is not the real person. The belief is sincere, stable, and resistant to evidence. The patient knows the face is identical. They are not confused about appearance. What is missing is the sense of recognition, the felt familiarity, the emotional warmth. The quality of this is really them that normally accompanies the sight of a loved one's face. The face is right. Something about it is wrong. The brain resolves the mismatch by constructing a theory that explains the combination. It looks exactly like them because the imposter has been carefully constructed to look exactly like them. The neurological model, developed significantly by Ramachandran and others, proposes that face recognition and emotional response to faces normally operate in coordinated pathways. In Capgras, the visual pathway is intact, the face is correctly recognized by the recognition system, but the connection to the emotional familiarity system is disrupted. The face recognition system says this matches. The emotional system says nothing or says something off. The patient experiences this as something is wrong with this person. Supporting evidence, patients with Capgras often do not apply the delusion to telephone conversations with the same person. On the phone, where visual face processing is irrelevant, the person can seem like themselves. The delusion is specifically linked to visual face processing and its disconnection from emotional response. It is possible, under the right neurological conditions, to look at the person you love most and sincerely, calmly conclude that they are not there. Story 16: Alien Hand Syndrome. Your own hand does things you don't control and didn't choose. Alien hand syndrome is a documented neurological condition, most commonly resulting from damage to the corpus callosum, the structure connecting the brain's two hemispheres, or from certain surgeries or strokes affecting the supplementary motor area or frontal lobe. Patients with the condition experience one of their hands performing complex, purposeful actions that they report having no conscious control over. The syndrome has a specific character that distinguishes it from other movement disorders. The alien hand's actions are not random or spastic. They are goal-directed, complex, and often contextually appropriate. A patient eating with one hand may find the other hand taking food away. A patient who has just buttoned a shirt with one hand may find the other hand unbuttoning it. In some cases, the alien hand appears to be pursuing a goal that the rest of the patient's behavior is opposing. Patients are unambiguous about their experience. They report watching what the hand does with the same relationship to it that they'd have watching a stranger's hand. They did not intend the action. They feel no ownership of the movement. They are not denying the hand is theirs. They know it is physically their hand, but the sense of agency, the felt experience of authoring the action, is simply absent. In some cases, the alien hand actively interferes with the other hand's actions. The two hands fight. In a real and observable sense, a person is in conflict with themselves. Two motor systems operating in one body with different goals, and no unified will resolving between them. The ordinary sense of authoring your own actions, of being the one who does what your body does, is a product of specific neural mechanisms. Alien hand syndrome is what happens when those mechanisms stop working for one side, while the motor system continues operating. The hand moves. You watch. It is yours. Story 17, Depersonalization Derealization, a real disorder in which people watch their own life from behind glass. Depersonalization derealization disorder is a condition in the diagnostic manual, not a philosophical thought experiment, but a diagnosable, documented, frequently debilitating clinical reality in which people experience persistent and recurrent episodes of feeling detached from themselves and from their surroundings. The phenomenology is specific. Depersonalization is the detachment from one's own mental processes, body, and sense of self. Patients describe feeling like an automaton, observing their own thoughts as if they belong to someone else, feeling that their emotions are not real, watching themselves speak and move as if watching an actor in a film. Derealization is the feeling that the external world is unreal, distant, foggy, or fake, surroundings that look artificial, colors that look wrong, other people who seem like props. Crucially, and this is what distinguishes it from psychosis, reality testing is intact. Patients know that what they're experiencing is a distortion. They know the table in front of them is real. They know the person speaking to them is a real person. The knowledge doesn't affect the experience. The unreality quality of the world persists alongside the knowledge that it's wrong. People describe their experience in specific terms. Living behind glass, like being in a movie, like my voice is coming from far away, like I'm watching myself from outside. Nothing has a sense of reality, even though I know it does. The neurological basis involves altered activity in emotional processing regions and their connections to areas involved in constructing the sense of self and world, but the precise mechanism is not fully established. Approximately 2% of the population experiences this persistently. Many more experience transient episodes. You may have felt a version of it and not known it had a name. Story 18, the rubber hand illusion. Your brain can be convinced a fake limb is part of your body in minutes. The rubber hand illusion, first demonstrated by researchers in 1998, is one of the most reproducible and most philosophically revealing findings in the neuroscience of body ownership. The setup takes approximately 10 minutes and works on almost everyone. A participant sits with one arm hidden behind a screen and a realistic rubber hand placed in front of them in approximately the position their real hand would be. The experimenter strokes both the hidden real hand and the visible rubber hand simultaneously, in synchrony. After a few minutes, the majority of participants report a specific experience. The rubber hand begins to feel like their hand, not just as a thought, but as a genuine felt shift in the sense of ownership. The rubber hand is experienced as part of their body. When the experimenter then makes a threatening gesture toward the rubber hand, raises a hammer above it, participants show measurable stress responses, increased skin conductance, flinching, withdrawal. Their physiological stress response treats the rubber hand as if it is their actual hand, because their brain has temporarily adopted it as such. The illusion works because the brain's sense of body ownership is a model that is continuously updated by sensory correlation. If two things are touched in synchrony, and one of them is a visible hand in the right spatial location, the visual, tactile, and proprioceptive signals are integrated in a way that assigns ownership to the visible object. The sense that your body is yours, that this arm, this hand, these fingers are you and not some object you happen to be near, is a continuously computed inference that can be disrupted with a rubber hand and a synchronized brush in about 5 minutes. The feeling of ownership runs deeper than logic. It also runs shallower than we assume. Story 19, anosognosia. Some patients with total paralysis are completely unaware they can't move. Anosognosia is a neurological condition, most commonly resulting from right hemisphere strokes, in which patients are unaware of a neurological deficit they have. The most dramatic form involves patients with complete paralysis of one side of their body, hemiplegia, who are entirely unaware that they cannot move that side. When asked to raise their paralyzed arm, the patient may report having raised it, or may look at the arm and confabulate an explanation for why it isn't moving. It's tired. They don't want to. The arm is fine. When the arm is physically placed in front of them and they are directly asked to look at it and explain why it isn't moving, they produce explanations. When shown video of themselves being unable to move it, they may dispute the video or accept that the video shows the arm not moving while maintaining that in general they can move it. The anosognosia is not denial in the psychological sense of a defense mechanism. It is not the patient knowing they're paralyzed and refusing to accept it. It is a genuine failure of awareness. The neurological damage has affected not only motor function, but the monitoring systems that would normally register the motor function's absence. This tells something specific about how awareness of one's own body and its capacities works. It is not immediate and transparent. It is mediated, produced by brain systems that model the body's states and report them to whatever we call the self. When those monitoring systems are damaged, the self receives no report of the deficit. There is nothing from the inside that feels different. The patient who denies total paralysis is not confused in the way a confused person is confused. They are receiving accurate reports from a monitoring system that is broken. From the inside, everything feels normal. Story 20, the extended mind thesis. Your phone might literally be part of your cognitive system. In 1998, philosophers Andy Clark and David Chalmers published a paper called The Extended Mind that proposed a position that sounds like a metaphor, but is intended as a literal claim about the nature of mind. The mind is not confined to the brain. Cognitive processes can and regularly do extend into the environment, incorporating external objects as genuine components of the cognitive system. The argument proceeds through a specific example. Consider two people trying to remember the same piece of information. One retrieves it from biological memory. It is encoded in neurons in their hippocampus. The other looks it up in a notebook they always carry. The information is encoded in the notebook and is reliably accessible whenever needed. Clark and Chalmers argue, if the functional role of the notebook's stored information in the second person's cognitive system is identical to the functional role of the biologically stored information in the first person's system, what principled reason is there for saying the first person's memory is part of their mind, but the second person's notebook is not? The parity principle, if a process were it to occur inside the skull, would be counted as part of cognition. Then if it occurs outside the skull in a sufficiently integrated way, it should be counted as part of cognition too. This is not a fringe position. It has been argued and developed in major philosophical journals for 25 years. It has significant empirical backing from cognitive science research on embodied and distributed cognition. Clark has written multiple books developing its implications. If the extended mind thesis is right, the cognitive system that is reading this sentence includes whatever external memory, retrieval, and processing systems you habitually use. Your phone, your notes, the search habits you've developed. Removing them doesn't just reduce your access to information. It amputates parts of your mind. Story 21, the Boltzmann brain. Statistical probability says you're more likely to be a random hallucination than a real person. The Boltzmann brain is one of the more philosophically vertiginous implications of cosmology, and it emerges not from fringe speculation, but from standard statistical physics applied to certain cosmological models. The physicist Ludwig Boltzmann in the 19th century showed that in a gas at thermal equilibrium, random fluctuations in the positions and momenta of molecules are possible. Given enough time and enough gas, you can expect, by pure statistical chance, fluctuations of arbitrary complexity, including, in principle, a spontaneous local ordering of matter that constitutes a brain, complete with a set of apparent memories. In the eternal or very long-lived universes posited by some cosmological models, the total time available is so vast that such fluctuations are not just possible but, if the universe lives long enough, statistically inevitable. And a Boltzmann brain, a momentarily assembled, apparently conscious brain with a complete set of false memories of a life and a world, is statistically far simpler than an entire evolved universe that produced, through billions of years of ordered development, actual human beings with actual memories. The implication, in a universe that lives long enough, the overwhelming majority of observers, things that exist for a moment with a set of apparent memories, would be Boltzmann brains rather than real evolved beings with accurate memories. If you are a typical observer in such a universe, you are almost certainly a Boltzmann brain, a random fluctuation with false memories, including the false memory of having read this far. You cannot disprove this from the inside. A Boltzmann brain with memories of having read this sentence would have exactly the same experiences you are having right now. The correct response to this thought is probably that the cosmological models, which imply large numbers of Boltzmann brains, are false for exactly this reason. But that requires that the correct cosmological model is not one in which most observers are Boltzmann brains, which is itself a constraint on cosmology that we arrived at, because we refuse to believe we're Boltzmann brains. We argued our way out of solipsism. We may have to argue our way out of this too. Story 22, Parfit's teleporter. Personal identity might not be the thing that actually matters. Derek Parfit was a British philosopher whose 1984 book Reasons and Persons contains thought experiments that many readers report as permanently changing how they think about themselves. The teleporter case is the most famous. Suppose a machine could scan your body and brain completely, transmit the information to Mars, and reconstruct you there using new matter, while simultaneously destroying the original. Is the person who steps out on Mars you? Most people's initial intuition is yes. The reconstruction has all your memories, all your personality, all your beliefs and desires, all your physical properties. Everything that was you is now there, in the same configuration. What more could continuity of identity require? But Parfit extends the case. Suppose the original is not destroyed. Suppose there's a malfunction, and both you and the Mars reconstruction exist simultaneously. Now, who is the real you? They're both equally connected to the previous person. Neither has a stronger claim. There can only be one you, and identity can't branch. So perhaps what the teleporter does in all cases, including the normal case where the original is destroyed, is not preserve you, but create a successor, someone qualitatively identical to you, connected to you in every way, but numerically distinct. Parfit's radical conclusion from this and other cases: personal identity is not what matters in survival. What matters is psychological continuity, having memories, personality, beliefs that are appropriately connected to your current ones. Whether this continuity is identity or something very similar to identity is not the practically important question. If Parfit is right, your deep concern for your own future self is not concern for the persistence of some metaphysically real entity called you. It is concern for a future person who will be very psychologically connected to your current self. That concern is rationally grounded. The self it's grounded in is not what you thought it was. Story 23, Julian Jaynes and the Bicameral Mind. Human consciousness might be only 3,000 years old. Julian Jaynes's 1976 book, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, contains a thesis so radical that it is simultaneously one of the most cited and most contested books in the history of psychology. It proposes that the unified, self-aware, introspective consciousness that you experience right now, the sense of being a subject who thinks about their own thinking, who can reflect on the past and plan for the future, who has an inner voice, is a cultural and neurological development that occurred approximately 3,000 years ago and did not exist before. Before this development, Jaynes argues, humans operated with what he calls the bicameral mind, a cognitive architecture in which one hemisphere of the brain generated commands in the form of auditory hallucinations, and the other hemisphere received and obeyed them. What ancient people experienced as the voice of a god, the command from Apollo, the word of Yahweh, was the output of their own right hemisphere, not recognized as such because the cognitive machinery for recognizing one's own mental processes as one's own did not yet exist. The evidence Jaynes marshals is literary and archaeological. The Iliad's characters do not deliberate. They receive instructions from gods. Early civilizations show elaborate structures for housing and appeasing gods who would speak to people. The increasing silence of the gods in historical texts corresponds, Jane suggests, to the development of the subjective consciousness that no longer needed to externalize its own voice. The theory has been challenged extensively. Most neuroscientists consider it speculative. The evidence is interpretive rather than direct. But it has never been definitively refuted, and the specific question it poses, when did humans begin experiencing the kind of self-aware inner life that we consider definitively human, has no established answer. Story 24, The Chinese Room. Understanding might be something that can be perfectly simulated without existing. John Searle's Chinese Room argument, published in 1980, is one of the most discussed thought experiments in philosophy of mind, and has taken on additional relevance as artificial intelligence has developed. The setup. Imagine you are locked in a room. Chinese symbols are passed into you through a slot. You have an enormous rulebook in English that tells you, for any sequence of Chinese symbols, exactly which Chinese symbols to pass back out. From outside the room, the exchange looks like a conversation. An expert Chinese speaker is in the room, understanding the questions and producing appropriate answers. But you don't understand Chinese. You have never understood Chinese. You are manipulating symbols according to rules, with zero comprehension of what they mean. Searle's argument, a digital computer is in exactly this position. It manipulates symbols according to rules, syntax, with no access to the meaning of those symbols, semantics. No amount of syntactic sophistication produces genuine semantic understanding. Therefore, no computer, however complex, can genuinely understand language. Understanding is something else, something that resides in biological brains in a way that symbol manipulation, however elaborate, cannot replicate. The Chinese room has generated decades of responses and counter-responses. The system's reply argues that while you don't understand Chinese, the room as a whole does. The robot reply argues that embodiment and causal connection to the world would produce genuine understanding. The other mind's reply asks how you know other humans genuinely understand, rather than being sophisticated Chinese rooms. Searle's own position, that understanding requires specific biological properties of brains and cannot be replicated by any functional equivalent, is contested but not refuted. The uncomfortable extension. If understanding is not the same as sophisticated symbol manipulation, how do you know which one you're doing? Story 25, The Homunculus Regress. Every attempt to explain how you see things requires someone inside to see them. The homunculus problem is a specific trap that nearly every naive model of perception falls into. And understanding why it's a trap reveals something specific about how difficult the problem of consciousness actually is. The intuitive model, you see something. Light hits your retina. The retina sends signals to the visual cortex. The visual cortex produces a representation of the scene. And then, something receives that representation and sees it. That something is the inner observer, the audience for the internal representation, what philosophers call the homunculus, the little person inside. The problem, the little person inside would need eyes to see the representation. Those eyes would need a retina. The retina would send signals to a visual cortex. The visual cortex would produce a representation. Something would need to receive that representation and see it. That something would need eyes. The regress is infinite. Every attempt to explain consciousness by positing an inner observer merely displaces the problem one level deeper. You haven't explained how seeing happens. You've just added an inner seer who also needs explaining. This isn't a critique of any particular consciousness theory. It's a structural problem with the entire framework of explaining consciousness as information being presented to an internal receiver. The framework requires an unexplained receiver, and that receiver requires another unexplained receiver. Indefinitely, the theories that try to break the regress, Dennett's multiple drafts, predictive processing, global workspace theory, do so by eliminating the inner observer entirely. replacing it with processes that do what the observer was supposed to do without requiring anything to watch them. Whether this works, or whether it just hides the problem more effectively, is what the hard problem of consciousness debate is largely about. The homunculus is always in the room. Getting rid of it is harder than it looks. Story 26, inverted qualia. No test can ever confirm that your red is the same as mine. The inverted qualia thought experiment begins with something simple and ends somewhere deeply unsettling: the color red. When you see a ripe tomato, you have a specific subjective color experience. The experience has a particular quality. It's what philosophers call a quale. Now consider the possibility that when another person sees the same tomato, they have a subjective experience that is systematically different from yours. The experience they have when looking at the tomato is the same as the experience you have when looking at grass. But because they've learned color language in the same world as you, they've learned to call what they experience red and what you'd call their grass color green. From the outside, there is no test that distinguishes this scenario from the normal case. The other person's behavior is identical. They call tomatoes red. They stop at red lights. They say sunsets are beautiful. Every functional measurement you could make would be the same. The difference is purely in the subjective character of the experience. And there is, in principle, no experiment that could detect it. You cannot compare experiences directly. You can only compare behavior and reports, which are the same in both cases, by hypothesis. The comparison you want to make, what does red look like to you, is structurally inaccessible. Your experience of red cannot be extracted and placed next to theirs. This is not just about color. The same argument applies to every qualitative aspect of experience. Whether the specific felt quality of any experience is shared between people is a question that no empirical investigation can answer, because every empirical investigation is sensitive only to functional properties and behavior, not to the intrinsic character of subjective experience. You have been assuming your inner world resembles other people's. You cannot check. Story 27, the philosophical zombie. A being physically identical to you might have no inner experience at all. The philosophical zombie, P-zombie, is a thought experiment proposed by philosopher David Chalmers to illuminate the hard problem of consciousness. A P-zombie is a being that is physically and behaviorally identical to a conscious human being in every way. Same body, same brain, same neural activity, same outputs in response to every input. The only difference is that there is no inner experience. There is nothing it is like to be a P-zombie. The lights are off. Nobody is home. The question is not whether P-zombies exist. It's whether they are conceivable, whether the concept is coherent. Chalmers argues it is. You can describe a being that has all the physical properties of a conscious person without contradiction. And if that description is coherent, if P-zombies are genuinely possible, not logically ruled out by the physical facts, then consciousness is not identical to any physical process, because physical processes are present in the zombie, and consciousness is not. The P-zombie argument has been debated extensively since Chalmers introduced it. Some philosophers deny that P-zombies are genuinely conceivable. They argue that the concept secretly contains a contradiction that isn't immediately obvious. Dennett's view is essentially that zombies are impossible, because if all the physical and functional properties are there, consciousness must be there too. Others accept that zombies are conceivable and take this as evidence that consciousness is something over and above physical processes, a genuinely non-physical property of the world. The most uncomfortable application, from the outside, there is no test that distinguishes a P-zombie from a conscious person. Every empirical measurement, every behavioral observation, every brain scan, all of it is equally consistent with the presence or absence of inner experience. You believe other people are conscious. You cannot confirm it. Story 28, Terror Management Theory. Human civilization may be an elaborate system for not thinking about death. Terror management theory begins with a simple observation from anthropologist Ernest Becker, developed into an empirically testable psychological framework by Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pajensky. Humans are unique among animals in possessing a sufficiently developed cognitive system to be aware of their own mortality. And this awareness, the knowledge that you are going to die and that death could come at any time, creates a potential for existential terror that the system has to manage somehow. The theory proposes that the management system is culture. Symbolic cultural belief systems, religions, ideologies, worldviews that grant the individual's life meaning and significance, that position the person as part of something larger and more permanent than their physical body, function primarily as buffers against death anxiety. The sense that one's life matters, that one belongs to something that transcends individual existence, that one is valued by others. These buffers reduce the existential anxiety that full awareness of mortality would otherwise produce. The empirical program generated from this theory, mortality salience research, has produced a large body of experimental findings. When people are primed to think about their own death, they subsequently show increased endorsement of their cultural worldviews, increased hostility toward people who challenge those worldviews, increased attraction to those who affirm them, and increased punitiveness toward moral transgressors. The theory's implication is vast. The majority of human cultural production, religion, art, political ideology, the structures of meaning by which people live, may be understood as, at some level, a collective response to the problem of being creatures who know they are going to die. If this is even partially right, most of what humans do is, at some level, a way of not thinking about something. Story 29, Eliminative Materialism. Beliefs and desires might not refer to anything real at all. The history of science is full of concepts that were once taken seriously as referring to real things in the world, and were subsequently eliminated from scientific vocabulary when better theories showed they were empty. Phlogiston, caloric, vital spirits, the luminiferous ether. These concepts had genuine explanatory power in their time. They referred to something in the sense that they figured in predictions and explanations that sometimes worked. They didn't refer to anything real. Eliminative materialism, associated primarily with philosophers Paul and Patricia Churchland, applies this pattern to the folk psychological concepts by which we ordinarily describe mental life: beliefs, desires, intentions, feelings, memories, thoughts. These concepts form the backbone of our everyday explanations of human behavior. We explain what people do by attributing beliefs and desires to them. The entire edifice of law, ethics, social science, and ordinary human interaction is structured around these concepts. Eliminative materialism proposes that folk psychology is a proto-scientific theory, in the same category as folk physics or folk medicine, a practical system for predicting and explaining behavior that works well enough for everyday purposes, but that is fundamentally false in a way that will eventually be replaced by mature neuroscience. When neuroscience is complete, the story goes, there will be no beliefs or desires in the picture. There will be neural states and processes. The folk psychological vocabulary will be eliminated, as phlogiston was eliminated, rather than reduced to or identified with neural states. The specific discomfort: if eliminative materialism is correct, then beliefs don't exist, including the belief that eliminative materialism is correct. Some critics take this as a self-refuting feature. The Churchlands take it as a challenge the theory is equipped to handle. The argument about whether it's equipped to handle it has been going on for 40 years. Story 30, Out-of-body experiences via brain stimulation. The sense of being located in your body is a specific neural circuit out-of-body experiences. The sense of floating above one's own body, observing it from an external perspective, being located somewhere other than where one's body is, have been reported across cultures throughout history, in contexts including near-death experiences, meditation, sleep deprivation, certain psychedelic states, and apparently spontaneous events. Their interpretation has been correspondingly various. Evidence of a soul or subtle body that can separate from the physical one. Evidence of a non-physical dimension of experience. Mystical experience of a non-ordinary reality. Neuroscientist Olaf Blank established something specific in 2002. Direct electrical stimulation of a small brain region called the right temporoparietal junction in an alert, conscious epilepsy patient reliably produced the sensation of floating outside her body and observing it from above. The sensation was produced on demand, terminated when stimulation stopped, and was produced again when stimulation resumed. The TPJ is a region involved in integrating information from different sensory modalities, vision, proprioception, vestibular signals, to construct the brain's model of body position and orientation in space. When this integration is disrupted, the brain's model of where the self is located can become unmoored from the body's actual position. The sense that you are located where your body is, that you are inside your skull looking out, is not a metaphysical fact. It is a computation performed by a specific brain region, subject to disruption by an electrode. The self that floats above the body in an OB is the same self that normally inhabits it, a model generated by the brain, temporarily located in the wrong place. The experience is real. Its interpretation as evidence for something beyond the brain is not what the neuroscience supports. Story 31: Split brain, two minds, one skull, two streams of awareness, two decisions when the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerve fibers connecting the brain's two hemispheres, is surgically severed to treat severe epilepsy. The result is a person who appears, from the outside, largely normal. They walk, talk, carry on conversations, live apparently unified lives. The hidden reality, revealed by careful experimental testing, is considerably stranger. In split brain patients, information presented to one hemisphere is not directly accessible to the other. The right hemisphere, which controls the left hand and processes the left visual field, and the left hemisphere, which controls speech and processes the right visual field, become functionally independent processing systems in a single skull. Experimental findings have demonstrated that the two hemispheres can simultaneously form different beliefs, make different choices, and hold different opinions. In experiments where the right hemisphere has been presented with an image or a word that the left hemisphere cannot see, the right hemisphere can communicate its knowledge through the left hand, pointing, drawing, selecting objects, while the left hemisphere, speaking through the mouth, sincerely denies knowledge of the content the right hemisphere is displaying. The split brain patient can, in carefully controlled experimental conditions, simultaneously both know and not know something, depending on which hemisphere you're asking. Whether this constitutes two separate streams of consciousness in one skull, two experiencing subjects sharing a body, or something more like two processing systems without requiring us to multiply subjects, is a philosophical question that the experiments don't settle. What the experiments settle is that the appearance of unified consciousness is compatible with significant functional independence between the processing systems that contribute to it. The unity of your consciousness right now is also functional and constructed. The seams just aren't visible. Story 32: Somatoparaphrenia. Stroke patients who deny their own limbs belong to them. Somatoparaphrenia is a neurological condition, typically following right hemisphere strokes, in which patients deny ownership of one of their own limbs, most commonly the left arm, and attribute it to another person. The condition is documented, real, and produces clinical descriptions that are among the most philosophically unsettling in the neurological literature. Patients with somatoparaphrenia are presented with their own arm and asked whose arm it is. They will state, calmly and with apparent conviction, that it belongs to the doctor, or to a family member, or to some unspecified other person. When asked how the other person's arm came to be attached to their body, they will offer explanations. The doctor left it. Someone put it there. It has always been there for some reason they accept without finding disturbing. When the arm is pinched, patients may acknowledge that whatever was pinched felt sensation, but still deny that the arm is theirs. The felt sensation and the ownership attribution can be dissociated. The neurological basis involves the disruption of the body's schema, the brain's model of its own body's structure and ownership, in combination with the deficit in awareness that characterizes anosognosia. The brain's model of body ownership, which normally tracks the body reliably, has malfunctioned in a specific way. The arm continues to produce sensory signals, but those signals are no longer being attributed to the correct owner. The sense that your body is yours, that these hands are your hands, that this body is your body, is a model produced by a specific brain system. Somatoparaphrenia is what happens when that model runs incorrectly. The arm remains, the model no longer claims it. Story 33, the Frigoli delusion. Every stranger around you is actually the same person in disguise, while Capgras delusion involves the conviction that a familiar person has been replaced by an identical stranger. Frigoli delusion, first described in 1927, named for the Italian actor Leopoldo Frigoli, who was famous for playing many different characters in a single performance. Involves the inverse conviction that various different strangers are actually a single familiar person, usually a persecutor, appearing in different disguises. A patient with Frigoli delusion might become convinced that a particular person is following them, and that this person is appearing as their taxi driver, then as a shopkeeper, then as a stranger on the street, then as a coworker. Always the same underlying person, always in a new disguise, always watching them. The disguises are taken to be perfect, explaining why the person looks different each time. And this perfection is not experienced as implausible, but as confirming the persecutor's sophisticated capabilities. Like Capgras, Frigoli is thought to involve a disconnection between facial recognition systems and emotional familiarity systems, but in the opposite direction. In Capgras, familiar faces fail to trigger emotional familiarity. In Frigoli, the emotional sense of familiarity, of this being a known, significant person, triggers even for faces that the recognition system would ordinarily classify as strangers. The experience is of being surrounded by an elaborate theatrical conspiracy, in which every new face is a costume. The hyperconnection of the emotional significance system produces the sense that significance is everywhere, that every stranger is not random, but is connected to a pattern that is specifically about the patient. What the two delusions together reveal is that the sense of who is familiar and who is a stranger is a conclusion drawn by systems that can, under the right conditions of damage, draw it wrongly. Story 34, mind uploading silent death problem. There's no way to tell if you survive the prospect of mind uploading, scanning the brain at sufficient resolution to capture its complete structure, and instantiating that structure in a digital substrate is taken seriously enough by enough technologists and philosophers that it features in near-term planning documents from organizations with significant resources. The aspiration is immortality, or at least the continuation of individual consciousness beyond biological death. There is a specific problem with this aspiration that no technical advance can address, because it is not a technical problem. It is the silent death problem. Suppose the upload procedure is technically perfect. Every neuron, every synapse, every connection weight, every aspect of the brain's physical structure that contributes to mind is captured with perfect fidelity and instantiated in a new substrate. The resulting system has all your memories, all your personality traits, all your beliefs and preferences and sensory dispositions. It believes it is you. It will tell everyone it is you. It will grieve for your biological death if the original is destroyed. But is it you? Is there any fact of the matter about whether your conscious experience continues in the new substrate, or whether the original ends and a copy begins? There is no experiment that could answer this question. The copy's reports are identical to what yours would be if you survived. The copy's behavior is identical to what yours would be. The copy's internal states, as far as any measurement can determine, are identical. Whether there is something it is like to be the copy, and whether that something has any continuity with the something it was like to be you, is inaccessible to any observer. including the copy itself. The copy wakes up, convinced it is you. You might have died the moment the upload completed. There is no way to tell from inside or outside. Story 35. The question your mind keeps asking about itself. Why does any of this feel like anything? We've been through 34 theories. Consciousness that watches without acting. Experience that might be an illusion. Thermostats with a flicker of feeling. A universe that thinks through you. Brains too limited to understand themselves. Everything you see being a prediction. Your decisions being made before you know about them. Your explanations being invented after the fact. No persistent self. No guaranteed ownership of your body. Dead people who don't know they're dead. A familiar face that's actually a stranger. A hand that isn't yours that is. What every entry on this list has in common is a specific target. The default certainties. The default certainties are the assumptions you carry without examining them because examination has never seemed necessary. That you are the author of your choices. That your memories are records. That the world you perceive is the world that exists. That you are you in a continuous, unbroken, owner-like sense. That other people are experiencing something. That you are. Philosophy and neuroscience, in different vocabularies and through different methods, keep arriving at the same result when they examine these certainties. They are not as certain as they feel. The feeling of certainty is itself a product of the machinery being examined. You cannot stand outside the machinery to evaluate it, because the standing outside is also the machinery. The hard problem of consciousness is not just a technical puzzle about brain mechanisms. It is the specific, vertiginous fact that the thing doing the wondering about consciousness is consciousness itself. The eye cannot see itself directly. The mind examining the mind is the mind examining the mind. The question your mind keeps asking about itself, why does any of this feel like anything, is the question that every theory on this list approaches from a different direction, and none of them fully answers. The question is real. The fact that you can ask it is the mystery. Story 36, the global workspace theory. Consciousness is just information being broadcast to the whole brain. And that's it, global workspace theory. Developed by cognitive scientist Bernard Bars and refined by neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene, is currently one of the most empirically supported theories of consciousness in mainstream cognitive neuroscience. Its core claim is specific and deliberately deflationary. Consciousness is what happens when information is broadcast widely across the brain through a global workspace, a network of neurons that amplifies and distributes information to multiple specialist processors simultaneously. The contrast is with unconscious processing. When you read a word without conscious attention, it is processed locally, the visual system recognizes it, semantic systems activate associated meanings, but the activation stays contained in its local circuit. When information enters consciousness, it is broadcast globally. The prefrontal cortex, the parietal cortex, and other areas receive the broadcast simultaneously, allowing many different specialist systems to access and use the information. The theory accounts for a specific set of empirical findings: the all-or-nothing character of conscious perception, the limited capacity of conscious attention, and specific neural signatures of conscious processing, including late, widespread EEG activity that distinguishes seen from unseen stimuli. What the theory does not address is the hard problem. Why does this global broadcasting feel like anything? Why is there something it is like to be the information being broadcast, rather than the broadcast just happening in the dark? Dehaene's position is that this question may not require answering, that explaining the global broadcast is explaining consciousness, and the appearance of a remaining question reflects a philosophical error. Most philosophers of mind disagree. The uncomfortable implication either way, if global workspace theory is correct: consciousness is a routing mechanism. You are a distribution network that became aware of its own traffic. Story 37 in activism. Your mind isn't in your head, it's in what you do. The standard model of cognition that has dominated cognitive science since the 1950s treats the mind as an information processing system. Sensory organs receive input, the brain processes that input using internal representations, and behavior is output. The mind is the processing. The brain is where cognition happens. Enactivism, developed by Francisco Varela, Evan Thompson, and Eleanor Rosch in their 1991 book, The Embodied Mind, and extended by philosopher Alva No and others, challenges this model at its foundation. Cognition, on the enactivist account, is not computation happening inside the skull. It is the ongoing activity of an organism interacting with its environment. The mind is not a thing you have, it is something you do. The specific claim, perceptual experience, is not a matter of internal representations of an external world. It is a form of active exploration. Vision is not a passive reception of images, but an active process of looking, structured by your motor repertoire, your bodily capacities, your history of interaction with the world. You don't represent a coffee cup, you know how to pick it up, drink from it, wash it. The knowledge is in the knowing how, in the sensor-motor relationship, not in an internal picture. The implications for consciousness research are significant. If enactivism is right, studying the brain in isolation will never explain consciousness, because consciousness is not in the brain. It is in the relationship between the organism and its environment. Cutting the brain out of its body and its world to study it in isolation is like trying to understand swimming by studying water molecules. You're examining the wrong unit of analysis. Whether enactivism is right about where to find consciousness, or whether it relocates rather than solves the hard problem, is the debate the field is currently having. Story 38: Higher Order Theories. Most of what's happening in your mind right now might not be conscious higher order theories of consciousness, developed by philosophers David Rosenthal, Peter Caruthers, and others, propose a specific condition on what makes a mental state conscious. A mental state is conscious only if there is a simultaneous higher order mental state that represents it. Put plainly, you are only conscious of an experience if you are, at the same moment, having a thought about having that experience. The first order state, the perception, the sensation, the emotion, is not itself conscious by virtue of existing. It becomes conscious when a higher order representation takes it as its object. Most first order states, on this view, occur and influence behavior without ever being accompanied by the higher order representation that would make them conscious. The implication for right now, a large proportion of what is happening in your mental life, the processing that influences your posture, your emotional tone, your attention allocation, your memory retrieval, is not conscious in the sense that higher order theories define, even as it is actively shaping what you do and what you perceive. The conscious tip of the mental iceberg is significantly smaller than ordinary introspection suggests. This connects to a body of experimental evidence on unconscious priming, implicit memory, and the role of non-conscious processing in decision-making and behavior that has been accumulating since the 1970s. The evidence consistently shows that unconscious processing is more extensive, more sophisticated, and more influential than people ordinarily believe about themselves. The specific discomfort: you are not the only thing happening in your own mind. There is a great deal going on underneath the part that is aware of itself. And what that part is doing, while you're aware of other things, is not accessible from where you're looking. Story 39: The Many Minds Interpretation. Every quantum event might be branching you into parallel versions. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, proposed by Hugh Everett in 1957, and now taken seriously by a significant proportion of physicists, proposes that the universal wave function never collapses. Every time quantum mechanics predicts a range of possible outcomes, all of them occur in branches of the universal wave function that cease to interact with each other after the branching event. There is no collapse to a single outcome. There is only branching. The many minds interpretation extends this to consciousness specifically. The branching of the universal wave function produces, at each quantum event, a branching of every mind that is correlated with that event. You, not just the particles in your brain, but your conscious experience, branch with every quantum measurement relevant to your neural processing. If this is correct, you are not a single person moving through time. You are a constantly forking tree of versions, each one unaware of the others, each one believing itself to be the continuous you. The version reading this sentence right now is one branch of a tree that has been forking since birth, since before birth, at every quantum event that has affected the neural processes that constitute your mental life. There is no fact of the matter about which branch is the real you. All of them are equally you. All of them believe they are the one continuous person. None of them can see the others or know how many of them there are. The many minds interpretation is not the mainstream view. It is taken seriously by enough physicists and philosophers that it cannot be dismissed as fringe speculation. Whether it is true is genuinely uncertain. If it is true, there are versions of you for whom everything that could have gone differently did go differently. Every decision, every chance event, every quantum fluctuation in your neural tissue. They all exist. You are all of them. You know none of them. Story 40, what keeps you up at night? The question that all 39 stories were building toward 39 theories. Consciousness that doesn't act. Experience that might be illusion. Thermostats with inner lives. A universe that is one mind. Brains that cannot understand themselves. Everything you see being your brain's best guess. Decisions made before you know about them. Explanations invented after the fact. No persistent self. No guaranteed body ownership. Your red possibly looking like my green. Other people possibly being empty. You possibly being a random fluctuation. Your identity surviving death only as a copy that might not be you. There is a specific question underneath all of them. Not is consciousness physical? Not do I have free will? Not does the self exist? These are the academic formulations. The specific question underneath them is simpler and harder. Why does any of this feel like anything? Not how does the brain produce behavior? Not how does neural activity correlate with mental states? Those are questions science is equipped to address and is addressing. The specific question is, why is there something it is like to be you? Sitting where you are right now, reading these words with a particular quality of experience that is yours and that you cannot share directly with anyone? That question has been asked seriously by serious people for centuries. It has been approached from every direction: physics, biology, philosophy, neuroscience, mathematics. Each approach has illuminated something. None has dissolved the question. The question is still there, exactly as it was, after all the illumination. The theories on this list are attempts to live with that question, to work with it, around it, through it. Some try to dissolve it. Some try to answer it. Some try to explain why it can't be answered. Some try to show it was never the right question. None of them has succeeded well enough that the others have stopped trying. The question that keeps you up at night is the oldest one there is. It is the mind asking about itself. And the specific reason it keeps you up is that the asker is the mystery.